Okay. So let's get started. Now we covered the course organization for this year, and now we can go right into the subject matter. We'll talk about .NET, and we'll spend today's remaining two course lessons recapping, repeating what we know about .NET, and we will take a look at what changes .NET 5 will bring to the table when it comes to .NET coding, okay? We will recap the C# programming language too, but we will do that in a flipped classroom style with Flipgrid videos, and I will tell you more about that later on. So the topic that we are now covering is the .NET platform. Now, let me ask you, imagine the following situation. You want to have an internship at a very interesting company, and they tell you that they stick still with .NET framework, and they want to move to a modern way of .NET programming. What would you tell them? Imagine you are in the HR department, they are interviewing you, and they want to know whether you understand the .NET platform. What would you answer? What do you know? I want to find out. This is not an exam, yeah? I want to find out what you already know. What do you know about .NET? What would you tell them? Is .NET Framework the latest and greatest version of .NET that there is out there? Yep.
There is .NET Core.
There is .NET Core. Okay. Imagine now I'm the HR person and you say, why don't you use .NET Core? And I say, oh, .NET Core? Never heard of it. What's that?
It's a way for C# to run on every platform.
It's a way for C# to run on any platform. Okay, wasn't that possible before?
Yes, but in a way more complicated way.
How? Before .NET Core, you wrote an application and you wanted to run on Linux, for instance. Was it possible? Yes, it was. How? The word I want to hear starts with an M. The second letter is an O. Mono. Have you ever heard about Mono? Yes. The history of .NET looks like that. Let me describe that. That's now a little bit of history lesson. I think nowadays, if you take a look at a programming language, you always have to understand where it comes from, okay? In the early beginnings, Microsoft had a severe problem in the early beginnings of .NET. They had this platform which was called Visual Basic. You probably don't even know what Visual Basic is, do you? It was a programming language, and it wasn't, let's say if you programmed Visual Basic, you really got things done, but you were not considered a serious programmer because, I mean, Basic, it's not a real programming language, right? But still, it was widely used. And the second big programming language in the Microsoft universe, if you wanted to build Windows application, was C++. Serious programmers, they used C++, but they didn't get things done because you were not productive because of so many null pointer errors and whatever. And then they had the big competition, which was called Java. Java was the first language out there who really promised and fulfilled a cross-platform virtual machine that runs everywhere, that makes you productive and gives you all the principles of a modern programming language. And then Microsoft invented .NET. The original idea of .NET was that you get a common language runtime, CLR. You will hear this term very, very often when you do .NET programming. A common language runtime on which many programming languages, including C++, Java, at the very beginning, Java was also running on the CLR, Visual Basic, and over time, many programming languages could sit on top. So the original idea of .NET was not to invent C#. C# was just one programming language, which was sitting on the .NET framework. And Microsoft was, from the very beginning, standardizing this common language runtime. This common language runtime was given to the world for free, the standard, so that everybody could implement the common language runtime. And this is what happened. Microsoft implemented the common language runtime on Windows. And the open source community implemented the common language runtime with Mono for other platforms. So you had two, let's say, little bit competing platforms which both could run .NET applications. So it was possible in the past. What changed with .NET Core? Microsoft embraced open source. This was what happened. Microsoft said it doesn't pay off, it doesn't make any sense that the open source community does such a great job in building a platform like Mono. At that time, Mono in some areas were better than the original programming language, that the original framework that Microsoft came out. And Microsoft said, you know what? Let's forget about this whole closed source stuff. We accept that we will not earn money by selling .NET. Let's make it open source. This is what happened. So they sat down and they started a multi-year journey where they said, okay, let's take the compiler and make it open source. Let's take the common language runtime and make it open source. Let's take the base class library and make it open source. And while making it open source, they also tried to redesign certain areas. They wanted to boil down .NET to its very core, to the really good things, because over time, Microsoft also made some bad decisions, design decisions, and they wanted to get rid of it. And the whole package, open sourcing everything, making it cross-platform available, and redesigning it, boiling it down to the very core. This is what .NET Core is all about. Yeah, this was this movement. Unfortunately, many people nowadays, even in the business world out there, still have the .NET framework in their mind. They still think that with .NET you build Windows apps. You build Windows Forms apps. That's .NET for them. If you want to build something cool in a container, in Kubernetes, on the web, in a cloud, you need to go cloud native, Go, Rust, C++, whatever. It's not necessary. .NET Core really is cross-platform and entirely open source. It sounds pretty simple if we just say, okay, they decided to make it open source. But keep in mind, they are investing a huge amount of money in the compiler, in the platform, and they are giving away for free all this stuff. That was a really difficult decision for a company like Microsoft to make. Because before, they could charge people when they build software based on the .NET framework. They could charge companies if they want to take the .NET framework and somehow make money from it. From that point on, they stopped. They changed their entire business model. You know why? We are not talking, just to give you an idea, we are not talking about the project where two programmers in Redmond work on C# or .NET. We are talking about huge teams. We are talking of dozens and dozens, hundreds of developers. And those developers are some of the best developers in the world. They are not cheap. We are talking about huge investments. How can they do that? They want to earn money. Microsoft is not a non-profit organization. It's not like a foundation like the Mozilla Foundation or something like this. They want to earn money. How could they do it? How could they say from 1 year to the other, we don't want to earn money with any kind of programming platforms anymore? Over time, you know what happened. They even got one step further. They made a development environment, Visual Studio Code, entirely for free and open source. Again, huge investments of some of the best programmers in the world. Why? How? Why do they do it? What's the business model? Where's their cheese? Yeah?
I think they probably think that when they use Microsoft environments, that they will also use the Azure Cloud, Microsoft Cloud services, which aren't that cheap.
Yes. Exactly, and now we are coming to the point. That's the strategic thing that changed everything. The business models of companies like Microsoft, it changed. Previously, when they had the .NET framework, they were aggressively selling Windows. They wanted you to use Windows on your client. They wanted you to use Windows on your server, because then you pay for Windows licenses. They only offered a database, a very common database platforms like SQL Server just on Windows, and they charged you for that. That was their business model. That was how they earned money. And they changed this business model and said, we don't, over time, over many, many years, we don't see the future of our companies selling licenses. We want to sell cloud services. So it doesn't matter if you pay them for Visual Studio Code or .NET or C#. They don't want to earn money with that. It's primarily an internal tool. They need tools too for developing software, and it happens that they do a lot of C# development. And they just say, okay, let's take our tools and give it to the world. We don't care, because the money that we make is in the cloud. We earn money in the cloud. This is also why Microsoft is now really embracing Linux. Do you know that in the latest version of Windows, you have Linux built in? You have the Windows subsystem for Linux. You have a Linux kernel in your Windows operating system. You can run native Docker daemons, native Ubuntu, native Debian directly in Windows without a virtual machine. That was absolutely impossible 15 years ago. They hated Linux. A CEO of Microsoft stood on stage and said that Linux is the devil. And now the CEO from Microsoft stands on stage and says, we love Linux. This is how drastically this company changed. And this is why this is the broader strategy that happened. They changed the business model towards cloud. And at that point, they said, we give it away for free. We make it cross-platform because we see the future in the cloud. And in the cloud, we see Linux. Windows is not the operating system, the primary operating system for the cloud. Linux is the operating system for the cloud. And if they wanted .NET to stay relevant, they had to make sure that .NET, C#, and so on runs perfectly fine on Linux. Because otherwise, it's not ready for the cloud, it doesn't fit to their business model. Understand what I mean? So this changed. And therefore, if you go out and you work with customers, you want to have an internship or you want to have a job, and you see that these customers are still using the good old .NET framework, which is closed source. Well, not anymore. You can also look up the source code of the .NET framework nowadays, but which is limited to Windows. This is something, or these companies will have to change. It's a dead end. The support is still there. They don't have to throw out the window, throw the software out of the window. It doesn't make sense. But they will have to change towards .NET Core. Okay? So .NET Framework is legacy. It's not bad. We still, in my own company, we still use .NET Framework. But yeah, it's not widely used anymore. So this is the .NET Framework. It's a development platform for building web apps, Windows Server apps, and Azure apps. It contains of the common language runtime and the base class library. Please distinguish that. Oh, you don't see my screen. I'm very sorry. I didn't share my screen. Let's fix that. Yeah, here we are. The .NET services include memory management, type safety, anything I didn't know. I think that's fine. Yes, and the .NET framework, generally the .NET platform supports many languages. Guess how many languages over the years have been built on top of the .NET framework? Shout out guesses. This is not an exam, just guesses. 5? 10? 100? What do you guess? significantly more than 100. You can run COBOL on .NET. Many, many, many languages are built on the Common Language Runtime. Yeah, good. No, let's stay here. Now, I told you what .NET Core is all about. And if somebody tells you what is .NET Core, what will you answer? It's open source, it's cross-platform, and it is a stripped-down version of .NET Framework where Microsoft got rid of a lot of the poor design decisions that they made over time. Question?
Can you actually look into the source code of Core?
I didn't understand the question.
Look at source code of .NET Core.
If you can look at it,
Yes.
it's a GitHub repository. You can clone it. You can build it. C# compiler, it's a GitHub repository. Take it, build on it. You can contribute bug fixes. You can contribute features. Even the team meetings of the designer of the C# language and the .NET Framework, they are broadcasted on YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube. Yeah, I think they are recorded on YouTube. They're not live broadcasted. So it's extremely open. It's not just, okay, we give you a glimpse into the source code. They live and breathe on GitHub. .NET, base class library, the tools around it, Roslyn, are some of the most active GitHub open source repositories on this planet. Same is true for Visual Studio Code. Yeah? But there is another website which is really, really helpful. You can remember it. It's not that important, but it's useful. It's called source.net, I think. And it's a complete source browser of .NET Core. Imagine you want to know how the datetime data type is implemented. You can click on it, and you don't need to start GitHub and look for the file, but you see here, including the documentation, the original source code. And it's also very nicely to navigate. So if you click on it, you can see you can navigate between the source code. You can here click on that one. You will see, if I go here, the different members of this class. You can click here. You will see the different C# files, so you can navigate through the source code, including the folders and so on. So source.net is a convenient way of browsing through the source code. I really regularly look at this website. If I'm not sure, is it faster to use datetime.now to get the current time, or datetime.utc now? Is it better to use this one or that one? Could you answer this question? Well, if you couldn't, take a look at the source code. And you will immediately find out that datetime.utc now is significantly faster than datetime.now. So, does this answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is .NET Core. You can take a look at it. Here is the link. Anything? Yeah. With .NET Core, something interesting happened. Microsoft became friends with the Mono, with the Mono team and the Mono community. The Mono community previously had to rewrite the entire .NET base class library because they were not allowed to use the code that Microsoft created. And with Microsoft going open source, the Mono team could throw away lots of their work because they were now allowed to use the original code from Microsoft. And what happened over time is that the Mono team really got part of the .NET team. Nowadays, there is a foundation, a non-profit foundation, which is called the .NET Foundation. And this .NET Foundation is running the .NET ecosystem, just like Mozilla is running Firefox and so on, and Rust, for instance. Just many other foundations. The .NET Foundation is running .NET and C#. Microsoft gave away the whole management of the entire project to an external body. Well, granted, many of the leading figures in the .NET Foundation are employees from Microsoft, so it's still heavily influenced by Microsoft, but not just Microsoft. Okay? Good. Next one. Have you ever heard of .NET Standard? I guessed that. Okay. .NET Standard is super important to understand how .NET works. If you don't understand what .NET Standard is, you don't understand what .NET Core is. So we have to talk about .NET Core and .NET Standard. The point is, when Microsoft introduced .NET Core, it was their .NET Core. But those companies who built software, for instance, on Mono for Android, for iOS, for Unity, the gaming engine, you maybe have heard of Unity before, they couldn't switch like that from Mono to .NET. It doesn't work because they needed to maintain all this stuff. And now Microsoft had a problem. They had this new beautiful world, .NET Core, but there were also different beautiful worlds which were built on platforms like Mono. And some people wanted to write class libraries, which work on iOS, on Android, which work in Unity, and which work in a WinForms application, a WPF application, and an ASP.NET Core application. Just class libraries. Now, how can you do that? How can you build a class library for all of these platforms if all of these platforms were at one point in time different? They grew differently. They weren't with like a magic wand. There wasn't a Harry Potter who said, now we just have one .NET and we organize everything and Mono becomes .NET Core and everything is magically compatible. That didn't work. And this is where .NET Standard came in. .NET Standard is a standardization of the minimum requirement that every platform had to fulfill in order to be called .NET Standard. The most important, it's difficult to understand, I know. The most important thing is this matrix here. Have you ever seen this matrix? The .NET implementation support, you find it here in the slides. This is really important. And if you ever want to get a job in the .NET environment, you definitely have to be able to read this matrix. Now, what is this matrix all about? It tells you here the .NET Standard. It's the minimum requirement. If you write a class library, we are not talking about apps or UI stuff. We are talking about class library, business logic, calculation logic, data models. Class libraries. If you build a class library and you build it based on solely the functionality of, let's say, .NET Standard 1.5, then you could be sure that your class library can be used in .NET Core 1.0 or higher. In .NET Framework, yes, your class library would be applicable to old and new .NET, but it would also work on Mono. With Xamarin, it would work on iOS, on Mac, on Android, UWP. I don't know if you ever heard of UWP. It's the native Windows GUI stuff. And it would also work in Unity, starting with 2018.1 version. That's the idea of .NET Standard. You don't write libraries for .NET Core, but you write libraries for .NET Standard. And by writing library against the .NET Standard, you could be compatible to a lot of different things. Imagine you want to build a business out of that. You build, I don't know, some kind of magic, I don't know, image processing library that can very reliably distinguish dogs from cats, and you want to sell this stuff because the whole world needs to distinguish dogs from cats in images. And it should be applicable in a Unity game, in an iOS app, in a WinForms app, and in an ASP.NET web server. Then you code against .NET Standard, not against .NET Core. Understood? Questions? I will demo that live in a second, okay? This is important. You have to understand that. Good. Now this is .NET Core. And now we are in 2020. We are in the present. History is over. The next version of .NET Core will not be called .NET Core anymore. Because what happened over time is that the Mono team, the .NET team, they all became friends. We're all good friends now. Time has passed. Everything is magically compatible. And therefore, Microsoft decided to drop the word core. It's no longer core. the next version of .NET is called .NET 5. That's it. It's not .NET Core anymore. There is only one .NET. There is one base class library, and it will be usable across all .NET 5 compatible platforms. There is no .NET Standard anymore. There is no .NET Core anymore. Yes, of course it is. Don't get me wrong. It's not thrown out of the window, but it's not the latest technology anymore. So nowadays, and that's the good news for you, if you write state-of-the-art .NET software, you can forget about all this complicated .NET Standard implementation matrix stuff. Just build on .NET 5, and it will run everywhere where .NET 5 runs. That means it works on a smart TV which runs on the Tyson operating system. It runs on iOS, Android, it runs in the browser, it runs on Windows, on Linux, on Mac. It runs in Unity, it runs everywhere. Every platform that supports .NET 5 will be able to run your code. Full stop. Understand what I mean? So this happened in the .NET ecosystem. In this course, we will try to focus as much as possible on .NET 5. It's currently in preview. The release candidate came out 2 days ago. I already installed the release candidate essentially yesterday in the evening. So we will use the latest release candidate, and I encourage you for your homework to also install the latest release candidate of Visual Studio 2019 Preview. That gives you the latest release candidate of .NET 5. In November, the final release of .NET 5 will come out. Fine? Okay, we have to talk about one thing, and then we will dive right into Visual Studio. Do you know what LTS versions are? Not just in C#, in any platform. Yes? Hi. Latest stable, yeah. What does LTS stands for?
Long-term support.
Exactly, long-term support. Yeah, it is a version that has support for a pretty long time. And this one is important when you go out into the real business world, because people do not want to reinvent, to rebuild their entire software every single month, every single year. It's very expensive. You as a student, you maybe don't have this problem, because if I give you homework, you write the code, you hand in the homework, and then you forget about your code. But imagine that in 1 year you go out of this school and you found your own company. You pay employees. You pay employees with your money. You want to sell this software. Do you really want to reinvent the wheel every single year? Probably not. Therefore, many companies really pay close attention to long-term stable or long-term support version, because it gives them kind of security. They build on a certain platform and they know that they will get support for at least a few years, 3 years, 4 years, depends on the platform. And the important thing here is that with .NET Core, see this one, .NET Core 3.1, it's an LTS version. And the end of support will be at the end of 2022. Now I got it. With .NET 5, we are currently in release candidate. And guess, will .NET 5 be an LTS version? No, it will not. LTS will be .NET 6. So therefore, what you currently are, we are now in preview. When .NET 5 comes out in November, you will still see a lot of companies out there in the market hesitate to use .NET 5 because it's not yet an LTS version. But 1 year after that, so the year when you do your Matura, you will go out into the market and then you will have .NET 6. And then your .NET know-how will be very, very valuable. You can go out and apply for jobs and you can say, you know what? I can help you bring your old .NET Framework stuff to the newest and greatest .NET 6 stuff because I know this platform for more than a year. And that's the point where I want you to get, okay? There is a really nice blog post Yeah, this is what I wanted to show you, yeah? And here you see the timeline of the different .NET versions. You see that one? And you will see here .NET 5 GA and .NET 6 in November 21 will be the LTS version. So what? What should you choose if you write code in .NET in this course? Can somebody please close the door? For new apps, you use .NET 5. For libraries where you need backward compatibility, you use .NET Core and .NET Standard. And for libraries which should be compatible with .NET Framework, you must not use something higher than .NET Standard 2.0. Okay? So if you build a library and you want to sell it to customers who still use .NET Framework, use .NET Standard 2.0. If you build a library and you want to sell it to customers who are still on .NET Core, use .NET Standard 2.1. If you want to build the latest and greatest app or library or whatever, just use .NET 5. Okay? Any questions regarding this stuff here? No questions currently? Good. Then we will take a look at the development environment and we'll try to find out how this works on the command line in Visual Studio, how we configure this stuff, how we can change libraries, how we can reference libraries, all these things I will show you directly in Visual Studio. Now, for the next exercises, you will only be able to follow along if you already have the latest version of Visual Studio 2019 Preview. If that's not the case, don't worry. Just look at the video beamer, try to follow along in your mind, ask interesting questions, that's perfectly fine. Up until next week, I expect everybody to have the latest software and, on your laptops, and then you can follow along all the exercises that we do, okay? Good. So I will now switch to Visual Studio. We will make another, I don't know the breaks already. Now is the big break, right? Yeah, we worked a little bit into it just to make it clear. Let's switch to German for a second. Der Direktor hat uns darauf aufmerksam gemacht, dass wir als Lehrer uns nicht mehr exakt an die Pausenzeiten halten sollen, dass sie das Ganze ein bisschen besser verteilt. Deshalb achte ich nicht so genau auf das Pausenläuten. Wir haben zwischen den ersten beiden Blöcken eine Pause gemacht und wir machen selbstverständlich auch jetzt eine Pause. Aber bitte seid mir nicht böse, wenn ich mich da nicht direkt ans Glockenläuten halte, sondern vielleicht ein bisschen später das Ganze einlege, ein bisschen früher, wie auch immer es didaktisch am besten reinpasst. Ich würde vorschlagen, bevor wir jetzt in die letzte Stunde gehen, wo wir wirklich live werken, machen wir jetzt nur einmal eine Pause. Es ist 9:55 Uhr, um 10:10 Uhr machen wir weiter und dann haben wir 40 Minuten Zeit für Live-Demos. Okay? Gut. Jawohl.